February 16, 1944. Across the frozen fields of central Ukraine, tens of thousands of German soldiers stand waiting in silence. They are surrounded. For weeks, Soviet forces have tightened a ring around them, trapping an entire army in what the soldiers now call the Korsun Pocket. Food is almost gone, ammunition is running out, and the temperature has fallen far below freezing. Tonight, the trapped army will attempt something desperate, a breakout through the Soviet lines. If it fails, 50,000 men will disappear in the snow. The trap had closed weeks earlier. By early 1944, the German army was already retreating west across the Eastern Front after the disasters of the previous year. Soviet forces were growing stronger with every offensive, and they were determined to destroy as many German formations as possible before they could escape. In January, Soviet armies launched a massive attack near the towns of Korsun and Encircled. The offensive struck fast and hard. Within days, Soviet troops had pushed deep into German positions, smashing through weak points in the defensive line. Then the ring closed. Two German army corps, nearly 50,000 soldiers, suddenly found themselves surrounded. Inside the pocket were infantry divisions, artillery batteries, supply columns, and thousands of wounded soldiers. They were trapped deep behind Soviet lines. At first, many soldiers believed the situation would only last a few days. German commanders assured them that relief forces were already moving toward the pocket. But the days passed, and the ring only tightened. Winter storms swept across the Ukrainian plains. Temperatures plunged far below freezing. Snow drifted across the open fields, burying roads and equipment. The trapped soldiers dug shallow positions in the frozen ground, trying to shield themselves from the wind. Food quickly became a serious problem. Supply drops by German aircraft were unreliable and dangerous. Soviet fighters and anti-aircraft guns shot down many of the transport planes trying to reach the pocket. Inside the encirclement, rations shrank. Soon soldiers were slaughtering horses for meat just to survive. Fuel was also running out. Without fuel, trucks and tanks froze where they stood. Engines would not start in the brutal cold. Without ammunition, artillery guns fell silent. But the worst danger came from Soviet artillery. Day and night, Soviet guns bombarded the pocket. Shells exploded across the frozen landscape, smashing supply dumps and destroying medical stations. Every bombardment brought more wounded, and inside the pocket, there were fewer and fewer supplies to treat them. The trapped army was slowly being crushed. German commanders inside the pocket desperately called for help. Outside the encirclement, a relief force had already been organized. German armored divisions were ordered to fight their way toward the trapped troops and open a corridor to safety. But the Soviet armies surrounding the pocket were strong. Every kilometer forward came at a terrible cost. The relief force attacked again and again, trying to break through Soviet defenses. But progress was slow. Inside the pocket, the soldiers could hear the distant rumble of battles outside the ring. They knew help was trying to reach them, but they also knew time was running out. As February continued, the situation became hopeless. The pocket was shrinking. Soviet forces pushed closer every day. German commanders now faced a terrible decision. If they stayed where they were, the entire army might eventually be destroyed. There was only one option left. They would have to fight their way out. The breakout plan was simple and terrifying. On the night of February 16th, the trapped army would move west. Everything that could not move would be abandoned. Heavy equipment, damaged vehicles, even artillery guns. The soldiers would march on foot across frozen fields toward the German relief forces, trying to reach them from the outside. If they could break through the Soviet lines, they might survive. If they failed, the entire army would be wiped out. As darkness fell on February 16th, the breakout began. Columns of soldiers quietly moved through the snow. Thousands of men marched westward in silence. Behind them, fires burned as equipment was destroyed to prevent it falling into Soviet hands. Ahead of them waited the Soviet armies. For a brief moment, the night remained quiet. Then the battle began. Soviet artillery opened fire. Shells exploded across the snow, lighting the darkness with flashes of fire. Machine guns tore through the columns of advancing soldiers. Chaos spread across the frozen fields. Units lost contact with each other. Soldiers stumbled through the darkness, trying to stay with their formations. Some columns walked straight into Soviet defensive positions. Others stumbled into minefields hidden beneath the snow. But the mass of soldiers kept moving forward. They had no choice. Stopping meant death. One of the most dangerous obstacles waiting ahead was the Gniloy-Tikich River. The river blocked the path to safety. Some sections were frozen solid, others were not. Thousands of exhausted soldiers rushed toward the crossing points. Men slipped on the icy banks. Vehicles crashed through thin ice. Wounded soldiers fell into freezing water and disappeared beneath the surface. The scene was chaotic and desperate, yet the survivors kept moving. Behind them, Soviet tanks were closing in. By early morning, parts of the German columns finally reached the outer lines of the relief force. German tanks attacking from outside the pocket smashed into Soviet defensive positions. For a brief moment, the ring around the pocket broke open. Through this narrow gap, thousands of exhausted soldiers poured forward. Many collapsed in the snow after reaching safety. Others simply kept walking, too exhausted and numb to stop. The breakout had succeeded, but the cost was enormous. Of the roughly 50,000 soldiers trapped inside the Korsun Pocket, around 30,000 managed to escape. Thousands more were killed during the breakout attempt. Others were captured by Soviet forces as the pocket collapsed. The frozen fields around Korsun were left scattered with abandoned vehicles, shattered artillery pieces, and the bodies of soldiers who never made it out. The battle became one of the most dramatic breakout attempts of the entire war on the Eastern Front. But it also revealed a deeper truth about the war by 1944. The German army was no longer advancing across Soviet territory. Now it was struggling just to survive. The escape from the Korsun Pocket saved tens of thousands of soldiers, but it could not stop the larger tide of the war. The Soviet advance continued westward, and battles like Korsun would soon happen again. Armies surrounded, desperate breakouts, and long retreats across frozen ground. On that cold February night in 1944, thousands of soldiers escaped the Korsun Pocket, but thousands more were left behind in the snow, and the Eastern Front continued its relentless march toward the end of the war.